guys, it's Robin, Art Silent Crafts, and welcome to my craft room. I recently had a request to show how you can trim some of these crumb blocks if you don't have a rotary cutter and a ruler and the mat and all that good stuff like that. A lot of times when you first start as a quilter, you're not sure if you really want to do this hobby and how far you're going to get into it. Some of these tools can add up really quick and be a little bit expensive. And if you decide after making your first few blocks that you don't like it, then you don't want to have to waste your money. Now for those of us that do this a lot of times, we already have our rulers and our rotary cutters and we just plop it down and we cut all around it, and that's nice and easy. But I'm going to show you how to do it when you don't have these tools. If for some reason you already do have one of these mats, then you can just line it up on the mat. Line it up on any of these lines here. You can go ahead and trim it with your scissors and then make sure you do whatever size block you want. This one's going to end up being 6.5 inches. But I'm going to show you if you don't have a mat, you don't have rotary cutter, you don't have any type of quilting supplies, you just decided, hey, I'm going to cut up some fabric that I have, some old clothes, and I want to make a crumb block and have some fun. So what I suggest is a manila folder. You can use a back of a cereal box, cracker boxes, whatever happens to be a little bit sturdy of a cardboard that has a plain back that you can go ahead and draw around and cut out. And we're going to use this over and over and over to cut out our different squares. So we want something a little sturdier than just a piece of paper. If you can't come up with any of these boxes at all, then what I suggest is if you're here in the United States, you can go to the post office and you can get one of their flat rate shipping envelopes. It's a cardboard that's flexible. It has writing on the inside, but there's enough empty space that you can go ahead and cut out your square if you need something bigger and all you have is a small cracker box or something. But we're only doing 6.5 inch square, and ultimately we're just going to come up with this square here that I had already cut out once. I'm going to show you how to cut these out. Now whatever size we're going to do, we want to make sure that we're going to do the same size for all of our blocks. I know that this is usually like 8.5 by 11, 8 by 11.5, depends on the size of the folders you get and what your box is. But I just have a mechanical pencil because those are my favorite kind of pencils. And I know that this one is more than my 6.5 inches, so I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to draw a line here. This ruler has one of those metal edges that cut things on it, so that just gets in the way. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to draw my line here. I'm going to draw my line here. Now what I'm going to do is, since I'm doing 6.5 inches, I will just measure it. Now you see how this ruler has a blunt end and then the line starts? If the beginning of your ruler starts right at the line, they say that a lot of times it's better to get a true measurement and go to the 1 inch mark. And then since we want to do 6.5, I'll go to 7.5 and make a line. Now that just makes sure that if my end got dropped on the ground and worn down or broken or anything, I'm getting my true 6.5. And ultimately, if you're going to use the same piece of cardboard here to trim all of your blocks, it's not going to matter if it's 6.5 or 6 1/8 or just shy of 6.5. All your blocks are going to end up being the same. So I'm just going to give myself a couple registration marks so that I know that I'm getting a square. Going to connect these. Now when I'm doing this, I'm using, as I said, a thin mechanical pencil. If you're using something like a Sharpie, you want to make sure that instead of going straight up and down, and even with this pencil, if it's wider at one point, when you're going straight up and down, it's going to move the lead of your pencil away from your ruler. So I like to go in at an angle and draw my line at an angle so that I know I'm only using my lead down here. Because if I'm going up here, you can see just this little bit right here is going to affect the width of my line. And then once again, I'm going to make some registration marks from here, just so I can have everything nice and square. For this short distance, 2 or 3 registration marks is plenty. Once again, I will line it up. And now I have my 6.5 inch square. Now it looks a little bit angled because I didn't draw any of my first starting 2 lines there, weren't really drawn straight. But when I go ahead and I line up my ruler on there, then I know that it's gone ahead. It's 6.5 inches all the way around. You can double check it by just popping your ruler down and measuring it this way. And then go ahead and use your paper scissors to cut this out, like I have here. Now you can do this before you start sewing your squares, so that as you're sewing squares, you can lay it down to measure it to see when you get to the right size. I usually keep my 6.5 inch ruler. I'll go ahead and put a link to my crumb blocks up there, and I show you that I like to keep my ruler around, so as I'm sewing I know when I've hit that 6.5 inch mark, and then I can put my ruler on here and pick a spot where I want to do it. I just whipped up this square really quick. I didn't use too many different sizes, and as you can see, it's kind of done in the log cabin style. Now you can measure this from the front or from the back, because we are going to be doing it with wherever we cut it, that's going to go within our seam allowance, so I don't have any problem with putting it on the front. If you decide that you want to see the fabrics underneath here, you can go ahead and maybe put 2 or 3 of these pieces of cardboard together, just use a glue stick. Then you can cut out the center of it, so that'll allow you to be able to see the fabrics underneath. I'll just show you real quick. It doesn't even have to be a perfect square, because you just want to be able to see what's underneath. So you can tell. See, when I'm cutting like this, I can see what's under here, and I can see where my fabrics are, so I can line it up. Just want to make sure you don't go too close to the edge, because you want to keep your square sturdy enough that you can use it. But by putting a few pieces of cardboard together, or using thicker cardboard to start with, it'll help you be able to see everything. So see, now I can see my fabrics through there. Now some of you might be saying, well, that you could use a piece of clear plexiglass for this, but at that point, if you're going to go have someone make you a piece of plexiglass, you can just go ahead and pick up one of these rulers, use your 40 or 50% off coupon at Joann's and get it on sale. But we're just going to go ahead and do this and see if we decide we do like quilting, so we're going to test it out. You can be very careful and line it up neatly. You can go off to the diagonals and have it a little crazy. I have just a regular clicker pen here. I probably wouldn't use a Sharpie unless you're using a fine point Sharpie, because that will just have too thick of a line there and it might bleed a little. So you're going to generally just use whatever you have on hand, and like I said, you can just spin it around and use it any way you want. You want to try to avoid, when we're cutting these with our rotary cutters, we want to avoid having it so that there's such a small seam right there. So we want to kind of make sure that we're, even if we have to cut this fabric off and use it in again in somewhere else, we can use it on our next block. So I think I'll just go ahead and do that and keep this down here. I can see the red seam and I can see it over here. Then I'll just draw around it. Now doing it this way, you might end up with pieces that are just not exactly as if you were using a rotary cutter, and that's one of the chances you're going to take. But once again, when we're doing crumb blocks and scrappy quilts like this, if things are just a little bit off, it's not going to be noticeable. If you're going to stitch these all together like I did for my craft room curtain, and you're not going to be using sashing, then it's really not going to matter if you're off just a little bit, because it's all going to blend together, because it's just going to be one giant crumb block. So you can see I have my lines on there, so I can just go ahead and cut it around at those lines. I would definitely only do one block at a time. I think if you tried to do 2 or more like you could with rotary cutting, then you might have more of a an issue with your lines not being, your squares not being perfect. Try to stay on the line. So when you want to try being a quilter and you want to try testing out quilts and doing different things, you don't want to have those tools that set you back. Like you don't want to say, I can't be a quilter because I don't have a rotary cutter or a mat. There are ways around it, because you have to think back when people first started quilting hundreds of years ago. They didn't have these. These are fancy new tools that have just been around for a little bit. So they didn't have the cutters, and they didn't have the mats, and they didn't have these rulers. What they did have is they had pieces of wood or cardboard or something where they drew their squares around like this. They used newspaper inside their quilts. So please don't worry about having something special. If you don't have exactly what you need, it's going to be okay. You could still create something fun, because they've been doing it that way for hundreds of years, right? So here we go. Now we have our 6.5 inch block. That didn't take that long. This video is already over 10 minutes because I like to chit chat when I'm showing things, not because it takes that long to do something. So once you already have your block cut out, you can go ahead and make a bunch of these at once, get them all pressed nice and neat, trace around them, and then cut them out. Save your larger scraps, and then you've already got the starting right here of your next crumb block. And you can go ahead and start piecing off that. And if that was too long and you didn't want to start with a long piece in the center, now you got the beginnings of 2 crumb blocks, right? So all these pieces can be reused. I'll just go ahead and cut off this seam before I put it back into my scrap pile. And this is why they say it's hard to be a scrap sewer, because scraps multiply when you're not looking. So we had that one, we used up all these scraps to get this one block done. And look, I've already got 3 or 4 scraps to start my next blocks. So I hope that helped you out. I hope that answered your question. It is really simple to go ahead and trim your blocks without having a rotary cutter. You will need some scissors though, and most of us have scissors, right? Thank you for your questions, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.